Welcome back everyone to the Panda School of Chess YouTube channel. You are watching the 7th episode of the Main Line Theory Speedrun. I remind you that the premise of this series is that I play the main lines as much as possible in the opening, so you guys can create your own opening repertoire based on modern theory as we progress through the series. Before we begin with today's episode, I quickly want to let you all know that I'm offering online chess lessons. So, if you guys want to take chess seriously and improve as quickly as possible and in as efficient a way as possible, then do consider it. More on this at the end of the video, however. For now, I shall just look for a game online and yeah, let's see what we get today. Alright guys, so I found an opponent here. We have the black pieces. We are facing a 1086 rated opponent named Rocky Rack from India. So good luck to my opponent. We are facing the king's pawn opening. So let's play the Sicilian defense as usual. And knight f3. Alright, so it looks like we might get an open Sicilian. And since for the purpose of this series we are knight or players, I'm going to go ahead and play the move pawn to d6. Okay, maybe not. Maybe we do not get an open Sicilian. We face the move c4. Now c4 is actually somewhat of a playable move, believe it or not, while it seems like it weakens the d4 square so badly. I, however, am going to try to, prevent the move pawn to d4. It's not really preventable if white wants to really play it. After knight c6, they can play the move d4 anyways, because the queen and the knight actually control the d4 square. But I'm going to try to dissuade them with the move knight to c6 and see what my opponent wants to do here early on in the opening. If they play the move pawn to d4 here after takes and knight takes, now the thing there is, okay, they don't do it. So after knight f6 and knight c3 after something like a6, we transpose into what is known as the O'Kelly Sicilian, which I don't have too much confidence in from the black side of things. So I was thinking of what they wanted to do after the move pawn to d4, but that is something we can explore after the game, I suppose. We face the move bishop e2, so already a very offbeat opening. Now this is a perfect example of remaining flexible in the opening, right? We are knight or players, so we are so used to playing knight f6 and a6, but that doesn't mean we should not choose a fianchetto setup if that is very effective. And the move g6 followed by the move bishop g7 takes full control of the d4 square in the center of the board and really makes it hard for white to move in the early middle game. So I really like this strategy. Let's start with the move pawn to g6 and try to fianchetto. Of course, white can still play the move pawn to d4 if they want. That is how they want to continue. But after I play the move bishop g7, they're not going to have the opportunity to do so. Actually, a much better move probably was bishop g4, trying to remove the defender of the d4 square. Okay, now I can no longer play bishop g4. Well, actually, I don't really like the move g6 that I played. I should have played bishop g4, taken on f3, and then played the move bishop g7, or g6 followed by bishop g7. But now that they've played h3, the possibility has sailed. So now we kind of have to stick with our strategy. Let's do it. Let's play bishop g7. And I think in this position, I'm not going to play the move knight to f6. Instead, what I'm going to do is go for a setup called the Botvinnik system, right? And the Botvinnik system in particular is a combination of the pawn on on c5, pawns on d6 and e6, and the knights develop to the e7 and c6 squares with the bishop fianchettoed on the king side. So it is the name given to a very, very specific system of moves. My opponent castles, so we are going to continue with the move pawn to e6. You don't want to play e5 because that kind of returns the favor. We have gotten the d4 square under lock and key now. White can never play the move pawn to d4 if we are careful about it. And we don't want to give them the d5 square, right? If we play the move pawn to e5. And we don't necessarily want to block the bishop either. The bishop is one of our stronger pieces, so we do want to keep it open. Which is the reason why I'm inclined on playing the move knight g e7 here as a developing move rather than knight f6. So the bishop remains attacking the d4 square. Well, remains as a controlling piece of the d4 square. So we want to disallow white from playing d4 going forward as best as possible. Alright, so knight g e7, a very harmonious developing move. Now we are probably going to just castle kingside on the next move. Yeah, white plays the move pawn to d3 because d4 is no longer possible. And now we can finish our kingside development with the move castles. King is out of the center, and we can now think of how we want to proceed in the early middle game. Now, a question to be answered is that of the development of this bishop on c8. As of now, oh, knight h2. Okay. Well, I was going to say, as of now, I don't think this bishop is going to be a particularly useful piece, but eventually we'll either develop it modestly to d7, or after expanding on the queen side, play the move bishop to b7. And notice how I brought up this queen side expansion idea. I think that is a very harmonious way of continuing these positions. But we have a lot of control of d4, and my opponent just moved away from the d4 square, away from controlling the d4 square themselves. So it makes sense now for me to just put the knight on d4. Now we can practice restraint, we can play a6 and b5. But given the opportunity of jumping into the d4 square, and if they come back to the f3 square or something, I can now swing the knight on e7 over to c6 to support the knight on the d4 square. Yeah. So I quite like it actually. Let's go knight d4 in this position. And we are going to follow up with the stock plan of expanding on the queen side. That is very typical to almost all anti-Sicilians. And I was going to say that if my opponent wants to do something similar, I think we are just faster in this position. And also this knight hanging is a little bit of a problem if they ever play on like b4 with the rook on a1 and the knight on c3. We might have tactics like this, right? Winning the rook over there. And if the queen takes, we just win the knight straight up. So I'm just keeping my eyes open for tactics related to this bishop. Because the bishop is one of the strongest pieces on the board. And my opponent attacks the knight. Now, it makes sense to support the knight with the other knight, I think. We can also play the move a6 immediately. But I think it is a much more reasonable choice to first play the move knight e6, clamp down on the d4 square even further. So if my opponent decides to take over here, I can always just recapture with the knight. Notice that this knight has only one square really. Well, it has knight a4 as well, I suppose, once they can get the knight out like this. But c takes d4 is something I'm going to keep my eyes open for as well. So a lot of tactics in the center and on the queen side, especially involving this bishop. And the general construction in the center is something I'm going to keep my eyes open for. Even more so after they have played the move rook to b1. Because the knight no longer has the b1 square to retreat to. I do not understand what the plan of rook b1 is. If they wanted to prepare b4, then a3 was certainly the better way of doing it. Now, already I see that if my opponent takes, then I can take with the c pawn and the knight is straight up just hanging. If I can play the move pawn to b5, I mean hanging as in trapped. If I can play the move b5. So a6 really makes a lot of sense in this position. But a6 is not really an artificial move, just hoping that my opponent would go wrong in that way, right? a6 actually has a lot of meaning to it because we are preparing queenside expansion with b5, and I think that if my opponent wants to play the move pawn to a3 here, after b5 they can actually play b4. But at the end of the line, I think what I'm going to do if that happens is just take on the b4 square. Okay, my opponent has blundered their knight to c takes d4. So what I was going to say in that position is, yeah, my opponent got the knight trap, but if they played a3, b5, and b4, I was going to just take. I play the move knight to a4. So I guess I will explain what I wanted to say there. Actually, I can take this moment as well because I do want to finish the point because I want to make it clear why the a6 is a good move. There I could take over here, and in case they just took back, I could just play the move bishop to b7 aiming at the center as well. And if some sort of a trade like this happens, then my rook on a1, a8 is much better placed as compared to their rook on b1. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail after the game. However, my opponent's knight is now just trapped after the move pawn to b5. It literally has nowhere to go. The queen covers the b6 square. So yeah, the move rook to b1 actually deprived the knight of a retreating square. Now we just take on the b5 square. And I'm going to speed up a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time on the conversion phase of this game. But I'm going to try to be as accurate as possible in converting this into a win, of course. So yeah, let's see. Okay, b3. My opponent is also playing very quickly is what I've noticed. Not a very good idea when you have a bad position. The opening itself didn't go my opponent's way at all because of how much control I got over d4. Let's just take the knight. All right, so I hope my opponent resigns quickly. I don't want to have to spend a lot of time in this video just trying to convert this. Well, what is my plan and to convert this position efficiently? Okay, they play the move b4. Well, we'll talk about the plan in just a moment, but notice how our pawn is actually an asset if we can just start pushing it down the board. Now, the thing is, if we allow the opponent to play the move a3, neither of these two pawns will really be a weakness. It will be difficult to attack them. So, a sound positional decision I am going to make in this situation is just to push my pawn down to a3. What this does is basically prevent them from anchoring in their b pawn with their a pawn. So the pawns can now no longer be connected. So if I had allowed them to do it, they had zero weaknesses. Now they have two weaknesses. The pawn on b4 is weak and the pawn on a2 is weak. You can imagine a situation where I can eventually bring a rook, enter the c file, and the a2 pawn will hang. For now, let us drop the knight back to e7. I do this in particular because I want to prepare d5 or f5. One of these pawn breaks in the center is going to be my plan to either try to get a bigger advantage out of the opening or at the very least simplify. If I can play d5, the trade happens and then I can get my knight to c3 as well, which is an incredible square for the knight. Opponent plays the move on to f4. Now, rather than d5, which allows the move pawn to f5, I really like the move pawn to f5. Because if my opponent takes, I take with the knight, and then the e3 square is accessible to the knight, which also comes with a fork, just like the c3 square. We can also play d5 if we want to increase the pressure. Notice that they cannot push the pawn up to e5 because that just loses the pawn. Right. Continues to play quickly. They decide to take natural moves again, so I'm playing this quite quickly. And yeah, I think the game is essentially just over. We are up a full piece. Now my general plan is going to be to play moves like queen to b6, just hold the pawn together and try to get over there and win the pawn. Maybe put the other rook on the c file, try to play rook c3 or something like that. Because my knight is now on, okay, that just allows the move knight to e3. So that is just a straight fork of the two pieces. Alright, so welcome back to the analysis, everyone. This was our second game playing the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, d6. I hope to see the move pawn to d4 here. Hoping that it would be the first, proper Sicilian knight orf of the series. But then we face the move pawn to c4. Now, I played the move knight to c6, which is, you might argue, a little bit inaccurate in this position because after knight to c6, that immediately allows them to play d4. You don't really want to take. We'll talk about this position in just a little bit. Actually, this is very much playable, but the better move in this position would be to start with the move bishop to g4. But we'll discuss knight c6 then, since that is what I played, and it is very much a playable move. While it is considered a slight inaccuracy by the engine, that doesn't really matter. Now, my opponent played bishop e2, and here once again I played g6, which is a little inaccurate. I should have started with bishop g4. We'll discuss that. But let us look at a little bit of theory here. What happens if they play the move pawn to d4? Well, you certainly don't want to take and allow this sort of a position because here you have transposed to the Maroczy bind structure in an O'Kelly Sicilian, which is really not good. This is not what we want in the opening at all. So after the move pawn to d4, I suggest the move bishop to g4 here. Now, what happens if d takes c5, first of all, right? D takes c5 seems like a really interesting idea because it aims to trade queens. The thing is the rook is defending the queen. Here you can just take. And if something like queen a4 happens, spinning the knight to the king, well, we can first play bishop takes and after g takes, play e6. The bishop is now traded, so e6 makes a lot of sense. Knight to c3, bishop to d6, something like this, and we'll just get a very good position. So you can even play queen f6 here, targeting this, and now probably just knight e7, bishop e5. So castles queenside, for example, bishop e5 is a very strong move. We can also castle queenside, otherwise if you don't want to play bishop e5, but you're very safe castling kingside here. The open g file does not cause too much trouble. Because you're first of all having very good control of the d4 square. The center is where we will win this game really. They cannot also play f4 very easily because we can just take. Maybe bishop f4 is also a decent move in this position rather than bishop e5. But bishop e5 is fully sufficient. All right. So if instead of d takes e5, what happens if they play the move pawn to d5? This is the main question, right? Well, we can go knight d4 to begin with. Now, after bishop e2, a very interesting way to play is just bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and then continue with g6. Now you're fully occupying the d4 square. This is a very good position. After something like this, for example, you can just play bishop g7, support the knight, and yeah, we are just fine in this position. For example, here queen b6 is another move that you can just know. For example, it attacks the b2 pawn, it attacks the d4 square. If they take here, it might make a lot of sense to take with the pawn actually, because it drives the knight back to a passive square. After which you can play the move knight f6, probably shuttle the knight around to the c5 square, play a5, and just enjoy a very, very pleasant position in the center of the board. So after knight d4, what about knight bd2, supporting the knight this way? Well, this gets a little bit more complicated. Here you need to know the move queen a5, pinning the knight to the king. Now this knight is under tremendous pressure once again, and after bishop here, we have essentially the same strategy of playing g6. Well, let us look at this line a little bit further. Castles bishop g7, maybe knight b3. Here it makes a lot of sense to just take over here and go back with the queen to the c7 square, keeping control of the long diagonal. Well, something like queen a2 has to be played, otherwise the bishop can never develop without losing the b2 pawn in such positions. We can play knight f6, and now after bishop d2, knight d7, bishop c3. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and long castles actually, because you have a lot of dark squared holes here. You don't really want to castle short. We have a very pleasant position once again. We can go g5, we can go h5, g4, h4, the usual stuff in opposite side castling positions. Black just enjoys a very pleasant position once again in the center. If they play f4, well, you can also start with f6 and then play h5, h4. Yeah, in general, just a good position. Free flowing play. Just put the rook on the g file and play g5 perhaps. You can also try to open it up. Actually, that might be a very easy plan to play with. Like, for example, rook d g8 is a good move in this position. I think a5 because you can just play a6. Knight c1 trying to go somewhere here. For example, you can just play the move pawn to g5. If they play f5, well, then they give you the e5 square for your knight. So that is quite good. You can even play knight e5 right away. This is quite a good position. Well, maybe probably not right away because you'll get your knight on e5 challenged in this way. You don't really want that. So wait for the opportune moment, I suppose. Just play something like this. H5 is fine in this position. G4 is also fine. Black has at the very least fully equalized if black is not just straight up better in this position. Okay, so now let us look at bishop e2, which my opponent played, which is certainly worse than the move pawn to d4. Now, here I played g6. Not a very good move here. Actually, I should have played bishop g4. What is the advantage of bishop g4? Well, I threaten to take. So if they play the move d4, I will just take and take in the center, something like this. Perhaps c takes d4 is actually a little bit better because now I get to play e5, knight f6, bishop e7 castles, the usual stuff, then move the knight and play f5. That is a very standard plan in these anti-Sicilians. And you just have an extra pawn on the d4 square, so d4 cannot be played. And yeah, in general, bishop g4 has the same ideas. If they play d3, you can play now g6, knight c3, just bishop takes f3, and then bishop g7. So usually, if you want to play like a Botvinnik setup here, this is very similar to the Botvinnik setup we played, except we don't have to now deal with the bishop on c8 struggling to develop, right? So bishop g4 would have been really good before playing the move pawn to g6. Fundamentals of positional play, really, I should have appreciated the idea better during the game. I realized immediately after playing g6 that there was a better move. Now, h3 I don't really like. The reason g6 is quote unquote bad, well, worse than bishop g4 is because now d4 is a legitimate move. Even here, bishop g4 is possible. d5, it's the same old thing once again, really. You can play this position, but I had an opportunity to go for a much better position. So that's on me. After h3, bishop g7, castle c6, however, I'm fine really because now there is no way to play the move pawn to d4 in a good version for them. They have to play knight a3, knight c2 if they want to play the move pawn to d4, but that is not really something we're worried about. I have enough time to then occupy the d4 square and then play knight ec6 to support the knight myself. So yeah, that was quite good. Knight c3, knight g7, and this particular setup here with the pawns structured in this way, or the pawn are sometimes on the e5 square, but the knight on c6, knight on e7, bishop on g7 is called the Botvinnik idea, right? Um, in particular, there are the plan you're trying to follow is just to play the move a6 and b5, and that is how you want to continue in the game. Now, even here, they can not try the move pawn to d4 anymore because two pieces and a pawn are defending the square. So they went d3, castles, and knight h2. I don't really like. After knight h2, knight d4, I just have a very good position. What they should have played, in my opinion, is this move bishop to e3, but I can still jump in with knight d4. They can't take because c takes d4, knight b5, knight c6, defending the pawn, and now I have a very pleasant position. a6 kicks the knight away to the a3 square, which is really bad. And also there is e5 coming in, there is bishop e6, rook b8 and b5 as well coming in, attacking the knight once again, pushing it further back, then attacking the queen side, making use of my bishops in general, which are aiming at the queen side very nicely. Knight h2 on the other hand just gives up the full center immediately, and here after a few moves my opponent just blunders and loses the knight. The conversion phase I won't really bother you guys with. A6 I will, a3 I will just point out for a moment again, because this I think was a really nice positional decision. So what happens if I just play a move like e5 in this position? They can play a move like a3, and now they don't really have a weakness on the queen side that you can reliably attack, right? So the move pawn to a3, playing it ourselves, isolates two weaknesses in a position where otherwise they don't even have a single weakness, which has to be good. So now I brought my knight back. I could also have gone knight e5 in this position. It doesn't really matter. We come back and play this. But I just like the simplicity of this idea. And pawn to f5. Now pawn to d5, queen to b6, all of these are good moves. Rook b8 is a good move, but I really like f5. Just gets my knight into the game, and now he just blundered with the move pawn to g4, the move knight e3. What could he have done here? Well, for one, he is just down a piece, but after something like queen b3, you still have to be a little bit careful, I suppose. You can go knight e3 in any case, and after rook f2, or well, they have to do something about this, right? Rook fc1 makes more sense than rook f2, I suppose. But then I guess there is queen h4, and now everything is falling apart. You'll go here. Actually, let's look at a few cool tactics. Here you can play queen takes f4 because bishop takes a8. There's just queen f2 check, king h1, and d5, blocking up the bishop. So there is now very difficult defensive job to be done here. Bishop e5. You can't go knight g4 after queen g3 because that just straight up hangs the knight. And then after takes, I can just go here, and that would be checkmate. So that is not necessarily what they want to do. g3 and bishop takes g3 are somewhat forced. They have to give up all that material basically to survive this position, and here we are just much better. After this, we can just play queen takes h3 once again. And the idea here is that there is this move, well, here there is just rook f1, I suppose. But notice this idea pawn to e5 as well in some positions where the bishop just opens up to come in and give a few checks as well. So very interesting. Of course, here you don't have to play e5, just rook f1 wins the game on the spot. There is no defense to anything over here. Queen b2, we just play rook takes g1 check, king takes g1, and queen g3, and that's it. The position is just done for. King h1, queen e1. Yeah. So there was no hope really after my knight got to the f5 squares. Of course, I am up a piece, so that should be pretty obvious. But yeah, in general, there was just no counterplay either, is what I wanted to show. That was a nice analysis. It is going to be a short video, but I think that is all I am going to put out today, because I do think that knowing how to play against these c4 structures is a little bit important. You're going to face this type of an opening quite frequently early on in your chess journey. Well, yeah, like I said, that'll be all for today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you really did like the video, then do drop a like, share the video with whoever else you think will also enjoy the video. Subscribe to the channel. I hope you find these videos instructive. A lot more are coming your way a little bit more frequently than you're used to me posting. I promise you that. If you want to check out my coaching academy, then you can certainly contact me through the email ID on the screen right now. A lot of you have already joined in for the coaching through this YouTube channel, and yeah, I'm getting some nice feedback, nice reviews. Thank you for all the support on the channel, guys. It really means a lot. Goodbye, everyone. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next video.